In a small, mist-covered town in the heart of New England, there was a young boy named Samuel Crane. From an early age, Samuel was different. While other children were drawn to the lively, sunlit fields or the bustling town square, Samuel was irresistibly drawn to the quiet, shadowed corners of the local cemetery. The cold stone tombs and the ancient, twisted oaks called to him in a way that nothing else ever had. Samuel's parents, devoutly religious and deeply superstitious, were horrified by their son's peculiar fascination. His father, a stern preacher, and his mother, a nervous woman with a constant prayer on her lips, forbade him from visiting the graveyard. "It's not natural, Samuel," his mother would say, clutching her rosary. "The dead are meant to rest, not be disturbed by curious boys." But Samuel could not help himself. The silence of the cemetery was more comforting to him than the noise of the living. The way the fog curled around the gravestones, the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves, this was where he felt at peace. He found a strange beauty in the stillness of death, a beauty that spoke to him more than anything in the world of the living ever could. One night, when Samuel was only 14, he heard the voice for the first time. He had sneaked out of the house under the cover of darkness, making his way to the cemetery as he had done many times before. As he wandered among the graves, a soft, melodic voice called his name. Startled, he looked around, but saw no one. The voice came again, closer this time, whispering, "Samuel." And then he saw her. A young woman, pale as the moonlight, with long dark hair and eyes as black as coal, stood before him. She wore a white dress that shimmered like the fog, and though her feet did not touch the ground, she drifted toward him with an otherworldly grace. "Who are you?" Samuel asked, his voice trembling. "I am Eleanor," the ghost replied. "I was once as you are now, drawn to the place where the living meet the dead. But I made a mistake. I lingered too long, and now I am trapped here, unable to move on. I need your help, Samuel." Against his better judgment, Samuel agreed to help her. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor guided him through the cemetery, teaching him the secrets of the dead. She showed him how to listen to their whispers, how to read the signs in the earth, and how to prepare their bodies for their final rest. The work felt right to Samuel, as if it were what he had been born to do. But Eleanor was not the only spirit in the cemetery. As Samuel grew more confident in his new role, he began to see others, ghosts that were less kind, less forgiving. Some were filled with rage, their faces twisted in anguish, their voices hissing with hatred. They would claw at him as he passed, their spectral fingers cold as ice. Others were sorrowful, their hollow eyes filled with tears as they wept for the lives they had lost. Despite the fear that these spirits instilled in him, Samuel could not turn away. The work of an undertaker had become his calling, something he could not escape even if he wanted to. He felt a deep responsibility to the dead, to ensure they were treated with dignity and care, and to help those lost souls find peace. His parents, however, were furious when they discovered what he had been doing. "This is blasphemy," his father roared, dragging Samuel home from the cemetery one cold, autumn night. "You are meddling in things that are not meant for the living. You must stop this at once, or you will bring a curse upon this house." But Samuel did not stop. He couldn't. The spirits had claimed him, and the pull of the cemetery was too strong. His parents tried everything, prayers, punishments, even sending him away to live with relatives in another town, but nothing worked. Samuel always found his way back to the graves, back to his work as an undertaker. As the years passed, Samuel grew into a man, and his reputation as an undertaker spread far and wide. People came from all over to have their loved ones prepared by him, for they knew he treated the dead with the utmost respect. But the townsfolk also whispered about the strange occurrences that surrounded Samuel, how he could often be seen wandering the cemetery at night, speaking to shadows, how the air would grow cold when he passed, and how the dead in his care never seemed to stay quiet for long. Even though he was often surrounded by the restless dead, Samuel found solace in his work. The voices of the ghosts no longer frightened him, they had become familiar, like old friends. He learned to differentiate between the angry spirits and those who simply needed guidance. He became a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead, ensuring that every soul found its proper place. But there was one ghost Samuel could never help, Eleanor. She remained trapped in the cemetery, bound by a curse she refused to explain. Despite all his efforts, Samuel could not free her, and it weighed heavily on his heart. Night after night, she would appear to him, her sad eyes pleading for release, but there was nothing he could do. In time, Samuel came to accept that he, too, was bound to the cemetery, just as Eleanor was. The spirits had chosen him, and he would serve them until the day he joined them in the cold earth. And perhaps, when that day came, he would finally be able to help Eleanor find the peace she so desperately sought. Until then, Samuel continued his work as the Undertaker, his hands forever guiding the dead to their final rest, even as their ghosts lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. And so, the cemetery remained a place of both rest and unrest, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred, and where one man's fate was forever entwined with the spirits of those who could never leave. Years passed, and Samuel's work as an undertaker continued. The townspeople had come to rely on him, and though they respected his skills, there was always an air of mystery, even fear, surrounding his name. Samuel remained the solitary figure in the cemetery, guiding the dead to their rest, while his connection to the spirit world only deepened. Eleanor's presence lingered, always at the edge of his consciousness, her sad eyes a constant reminder of his failure to help her. Night after night, she would appear, her voice soft as the wind, pleading for release. Samuel had tried every ritual, every prayer he knew, but nothing worked. She was bound to the cemetery, just as he was bound to his duty. But then, one stormy night, something changed. Samuel was preparing a grave for a young woman who had died suddenly, her life cut short by illness. As he worked, the wind howled through the trees, and the rain poured down in sheets. In the midst of the storm, Eleanor appeared, more solid than ever before, her eyes wide with a new intensity. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice filled with urgency. "The time has come. There is one final act you must perform to free me." Samuel paused, looking up at her through the rain. "What must I do?" he asked, his heart heavy with the weight of years of failure. Eleanor told him of a ritual, one that required a sacrifice, a part of his own soul. The ritual would bind his spirit to hers, allowing her to pass on but leaving him forever tied to the cemetery, even in death. It was a choice Samuel had always known he would have to make, but now, faced with it, the reality of it shook him to his core. After a long, silent moment, Samuel nodded. "I will do it," he said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at his heart. "I cannot leave you here any longer." The ritual was simple, yet profound. Samuel performed it under the ancient oak tree at the center of the cemetery, the tree where Eleanor had been buried so many years ago. As he completed the final steps, a bright light surrounded Eleanor, and for the first time, she smiled, a radiant, peaceful smile. Then, in a flash of light, she was gone, leaving Samuel alone under the dark sky. He felt the change immediately. A coldness seeped into his bones, a chill that would never leave him. He was now bound to the cemetery, just as he had bound Eleanor to her freedom. But there was a sense of peace in him as well, knowing he had finally done right by her. Not long after Eleanor's release, Samuel's father fell gravely ill. The old preacher, who had always disapproved of Samuel's work, grew weaker by the day. The townsfolk said it was a punishment from God, a curse brought upon by his son's unholy occupation. Samuel, though heartbroken, could not abandon his father in his final days. He cared for him, as best as he could, though his father refused to speak to him, his eyes filled with the same cold fury they had held since Samuel first became an undertaker. When his father finally passed, Samuel was left with a painful duty. No one else could perform the rites as he could, and so he prepared his father's body, his hands trembling as he worked. The room was filled with a thick, oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of Samuel's quiet sobs. He could feel his father's presence, lingering in the room, watching him with disdain. As Samuel washed his father's body, he noticed something strange. The skin was cold, far colder than any body he had ever touched before. The eyes, though closed, seemed to stare at him, burning with an unseen rage. The air around him grew thick with the scent of decay, even though the body was freshly dead. And then, as Samuel placed his father in the coffin, the ghost appeared. His father, twisted and angry, stood at the foot of the bed, his face contorted with hatred. "You have defiled our family, Samuel," the ghost hissed, his voice echoing with bitterness. "You have brought shame upon us with your dealings with the dead." Samuel, tears streaming down his face, pleaded with his father's spirit. "I did what I had to do, Father. I did it for them, for those who have no one else. Please, let me help you find peace." But his father's spirit would not listen. The room grew colder, the shadows darker, as the spirit's rage grew. Samuel could feel the weight of his father's disapproval crushing him, the sorrow of a lifetime's worth of regret and anger washing over him. He realized then that his father's spirit was not at rest because of the hatred he had carried with him into death. It was Eleanor's memory that gave Samuel the strength to face his father's wrath. He knew what had to be done. Taking a deep breath, he reached out to his father's spirit, offering a prayer of forgiveness, a plea for peace. As he did, he felt a warmth spread through him, pushing back the cold, the darkness. Slowly, the anger in his father's ghost began to fade. The twisted features softened, the eyes closed, and the spirit seemed to sigh, as if releasing the burden of a lifetime's worth of resentment. Finally, with one last look at his son, the spirit vanished, leaving Samuel alone with his tears and the cold, lifeless body of the man who had never truly understood him. After his father's burial, Samuel knew it was time to step away from his role as an undertaker. The work had taken its toll on him, and he could no longer bear the weight of the spirits that lingered in the shadows. He sought out a young man from the town, someone who had always shown an interest in his work. The boy was eager to learn, and Samuel trained him in the ways of the dead, passing on all the knowledge he had gathered over the years. When the time came to leave, Samuel walked through the cemetery one last time, feeling the spirits watching him, their whispers of gratitude filling the air. He paused at Eleanor's grave, placing a single white lily on the stone. As he walked away, the wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in his life, Samuel felt truly free.